I've been saving for the ring for months now. Every paycheck, a little set aside. Nothing crazy. But enough to get something that make Emily smile in that way she always does when she's genuinely happy. You know, the kind where her whole face lights up, her eyes crinkle at the corners, and there's this little laugh that escapes only for a second, but man, it's infectious. That's the moment I wanted when I got down on one knee. Could even picture it, a quiet dinner, just us, maybe near the park where we always go on Sundays. It's cheesy, sure, but that's kind of the whole point, isn't it? She'd been more distant lately. Not in a something's definitely wrong way, but enough for me to notice. I guess you pick up on these things after 3 years. There's always been this restlessness in her, a need for something new, something more. I respected that, tried not to crowd her. It's part of who she is, really. Probably what drew me to her in the first place. That wild spark underneath all her charm. But sometimes it got to me. The other night she'd mentioned Adam again. Said he cracked some joke during their team meeting. Something that had the whole office laughing. I had to remind myself Adam was just that guy. The one who made everyone laugh with barely any effort, the life of every gathering, the go-to for happy hour after work. Can't say I didn't understand why she liked hanging around him. Hell, I liked the guy well enough despite never spending any real time with him. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't notice how often his name came up in our conversations. Every story, every little anecdote wound back to him. Adam said this, Adam did that. I wasn't insecure. That's not what this was, at least not really. I trusted Emily. Always had. But still, when the stories came one after the other, it left this gnawing feeling like a stone sitting at the bottom of my gut. Pushing that aside, I looked at the small velvet box I'd hidden in the back of my dresser. Wednesday would make it official, 3 years to the day. Felt like the right time. Yeah, she'd been distant, but people have moods, right? Work stress, maybe. Something about that marketing campaign she'd been dealing with for weeks. This proposal was going to fix everything. Or maybe not fix, something didn't feel broken between us. But it'd solidify things. Cement the foundation we'd been building. I'd show her I was committed to her. That no matter how hard work got, how complicated life became, I wanted to face all of it with her. Longer nights, bad days, everything. There's a certain kind of peace in standing still, in being present with each other, right? That's what we had. Or at least I thought we did. I heard Emily come in from the kitchen. Her voice carried, soft and upbeat. She was on the phone with someone, probably one of her friends. I caught Adam's name again floating through, carelessly tossed into laughter. I shook it off. Focus. Wednesday. I had to make sure everything was set for Wednesday. I closed the drawer again. The velvet box hidden away, but it didn't make the unease go away with it. When Emily handed me that plane ticket, I didn't know what to say at first. I mean, she knew I missed Mark, but I guess I hadn't realized just how much until I was looking at that ticket. Chicago, round trip, all set for the weekend after my birthday. I was stunned, in a good way though. I stared at the damn thing, feeling like a kid about to go on his first adventure. I'd been talking about visiting Mark for months, but between work and saving money it never seemed like the right time. She must have seen through that. Seen how badly I needed the break. Honestly, things had been kinda off with us. I didn't want to focus on it too much, especially now. Here she was, proving again that she understood me. I couldn't stop thinking she really gets me as Emily stood there, smiling, waiting for me to react. I felt this rush of gratitude, thinking maybe I'd been overthinking things lately. It's perfect, I finally managed. I've been dying to catch up with Mark. She smiled wider, a glance of something flickering in her eyes, but it passed too quick for me to hold on to it. I thought you could use the break, she said, real casual. Things have been crazy at work, and you've been talking about it forever. She was right. Between deadlines at the firm and trying to figure out when and how to propose, my brain's been under siege. The upcoming trip was a chance to shake it all off a bit. Unwind. Reconnect. She leaned against the counter, crossing her arms, a teasing glint in her eyes. Just don't forget about me while you're there, she said, her words light, but earnest. I'll be here, holding down the fort. I laughed it off, reaching out to pull her into a hug, savoring the way her body fit against mine. Something reassuring in that closeness. Trust me, I said. I'll miss you. She was smiling when she pulled back, but there was a tightness around her jaw, one I didn't catch until now, almost like she was focused too hard on keeping the smile in place. And it stayed with me how her face didn't match the rest of the moment. But I didn't push it. I chose to see the gift and the plane ticket for what it was, a gesture. A reminder that we, despite everything, cared about each other. Maybe that's why, when she insisted she'd miss me too, I believed her. Arriving in Chicago, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. No worries about work, no daily routine grinding me down. It was just me and Mark, like old times. We hit up some dive bars, nothing fancy, just places we could talk and catch up. The first day felt normal. I mean, it was great. Mark's sense of humor hadn't changed. His mix of laid-back sarcasm and knowing humor always made shit easier. We kept busy enough that I didn't really check my phone until late in the evening. When I did call Emily, she sounded cheerful, almost too cheerful, like how someone acts when they're forced to put on their best face but inside there's more going on. But I didn't think too much of it. We laughed about how Mark had already dragged me to some dingy steakhouse that didn't measure up to her standards. And that's the thing about Emily. She's always had her idea of perfect when it comes to food. Outfits, whatever. Anyway, she asked about our plans for the next day, seemed genuinely interested, and the call ended on a warm note. The next day was different, though. I woke up and texted Emily. Just the usual good morning stuff. Nothing weird, really. She took longer to reply, which was fine considering her work hours. It wasn't until I called her in the evening that something felt off. Emily's tone was different this time. Short, clipped, like she didn't want to give anything away but also clearly wasn't in the mood for a long chat. She rushed through talking about her day, barely mentioned anything about work or Adam, when usually she didn't shut up about the office. I could feel her wanting to end the call before it had even really started. Tired? I asked, figuring maybe she'd had one of her hellish workload days. She replied with something short. Yeah, long day. I should probably get some rest. And that was it. No drawn-out I'll miss you or casual jokes like the night before. I stared at my phone, a little too long after the call ended, rereading our texts from earlier in the week to see if I had missed something. But no, everything seemed fine, normal even. Still, that pit in my stomach started creeping up again. That's when I mentioned it to Mark. We were sitting on his couch, beers in hand, some random sports game on TV we weren't really paying attention to. Tension? He smirked, dragging it out like the answer was obvious. You're in withdrawal, man. You've always been like this with her. I cracked a smile, half agreeing, but the uneasy feeling wasn't fading. Mark had a point though, maybe I was just being paranoid. A few days away from someone you've basically spent every waking hour with for years, it'll mess with your head. Still, every call felt shorter, like she had somewhere else to be. Every conversation lacked the usual connection, and no matter how much I told myself to shake it off, it gnawed at the back of my mind. As the trip in Chicago was winding down, that weird feeling in my gut was only getting worse. It wasn't just homesickness. Maybe I could have chalked it up to that on day one, maybe even day two. But now, on the last day, everything about Emily seemed off. She'd barely called me today. Not even a "how's your day going?" And the brief exchange we had felt hollow, like she was just doing it because it was part of some routine, not because she really wanted to hear from me. Mark didn't seem too bothered when I brought it up again. He laughed it off over beers the night before, telling me I was just feeling the strain of the distance and being emotional cause of how much I was missing her. Maybe he was right. I'd thought at first, but after today's complete disinterest from her, I couldn't convince myself anymore that this was just in my head. Emily used to be all over little details, asking about my plans for the day, or complaining about something at the office with that annoying coworker Karen of hers. But now there was this weird silence, like she was avoiding anything that required real interaction. The worst part was how she hadn't even mentioned the apartment lately. My chest tightened thinking about it. That was our spot, our home, not just mine. But she didn't ask how I was holding up without me, or if the plants were still alive after I probably overwatered them. Nothing. Just coldness. I was driving myself insane with it. Every unanswered text built more pressure in my chest, and I told Mark I had to cut my trip short. I loved hanging with him, catching up with my best friend after so long, but I needed to get home. Something was wrong, and I had to know exactly what. Mark tried soothing me again, telling me not to jump to conclusions, but I'd already packed. I needed to see her. Getting back to the apartment was weird. It was early afternoon, so Emily was at work, which I found myself almost relieved by. I wasn't sure I could face her just yet, not without some kind of explanation for what'd been nagging me all week. But damn, soon as I stepped inside, it felt like I'd walked into somewhere I hadn't lived in a long, long time. The smell hit me first. Some kind of cologne. Not mine. I took a second to look around, trying to spot anything different. Maybe she got some new air freshener or candle. But no. This was sharp, like someone had just been there spraying it all over themselves before heading out. I walked into the living room, and suddenly, even the couch felt wrong to me. It was the way the cushions were sunk in, almost like someone had been planted on them recently. Someone who wasn't supposed to be there. I hovered my hand over the indentation. It was just subtle enough that I thought maybe I'm losing it. In the bathroom, though, that was the final straw. I stood there for a moment, staring at the counter, eyes catching on a small hair tie. My chest tightened. Emily hadn't worn this type in forever. She only used the thicker ones now. This was some cheap elastic band a high school kid might use, dark brown and twisted. Forcing my breathing to slow, I tossed it into the trash, but I couldn't calm the thoughts racing through my head. I headed into the bedroom, expecting to feel safe, maybe some kind of comfort, or at least some peace from not seeing anything unusual. But again, something was just off. The bed. The sheets were messy, not in the way they normally would be with just us sleeping there during the week. The blankets weren't pulled back how she left them after waking up, which bugged the hell out to me, considering she was the neurotic one about making the bed. This felt wrong. That night, after unpacking my bag, I sat down with Emily. I couldn't shake the weirdness that had lingered since I got home. It was the little things. The hair tie, the cologne on the couch, none of this screamed normal to me, and my gut twisted the more I thought about it. So, I brought it up. Simple, asked about the hair tie and this weird, lingering scent in the apartment. I tried to sound casual, but we both knew I wasn't. Emily's response was immediate, too immediate. She laughed, dismissing it, a flicker of forced nonchalance in her voice. Maybe you're just paranoid, she tossed out with a grin that didn't quite hit her eyes. There was this attempt to wave it all away like I was overthinking. Part of me wanted to believe her, desperately in fact. But I had spent the last few days in Chicago wrecking my mind over these small details. And now being back, standing in it, I couldn't unsee it. Paranoid? I repeated, my voice tighter than I intended. I could see the edges of her smile faltering as I pressed just a little more. That's when she cracked. Just for a split second. A hitch in her voice, her face stiffening. She glanced towards the floor, and I got this sinking feeling in my chest before she even started speaking. All right, she said, her voice quieter now, like she was conceding some unspoken battle. Adam stopped by to drop off some work files. It wasn't a big deal. Adam. Of course it was Adam. I clenched my jaw, feeling my stomach twist at the mention of his name. All those times she'd mentioned him casually. All the laughs I overheard. Now this. There was too much happening beneath the surface for me to buy that she thought this was nothing. But hell, maybe that's what I wanted to believe. I sat there biting my tongue, nodding like I was okay with it, but the heavy sting of betrayal churned in me. Just dropping off work files? The question came out quieter than I meant, but the steadiness in my voice betrayed none of the storm swirling inside. She shrugged, still playing it cool on the surface. That nonchalant shrug felt like another punch to the gut. I knew her well enough to see the cracks forming. Something was wrong, but she didn't want to give it up. I tried to convince myself she was telling the truth. Tried stupidly to believe the explanation could be as innocent as she claimed. Adam coming over. Yeah, okay, maybe. Except why the hair tie? Why the cologne? And why had she never mentioned it? It felt off. All of it. But still, I kept my thoughts locked in my head. Needed to ride this out. Maybe I was being paranoid after all. But the gut feeling, man, it didn't stop screaming at me that something wasn't adding up here. Hours passed after I tried to bury the issue, but it gnawed at me more than before. So I brought it back up, unwilling to just let it slide. This time, though, Emily's reaction was different. Defensive. She hit back like a cornered animal. You're seriously blowing this out of proportion. She snapped, arms crossed over her chest now, almost angry that I hadn't just dropped it earlier. The more I pushed, the more she dug her heels in. You act like it's crazy for me to have a friend stop by. It's work, Kevin. And honestly, this is getting controlling, she threw at me, her accusations coming in sharper, angrier now. You don't trust me. Is that it? I swallowed hard, guilt poking at my chest. Was I jealous? Was I overreacting? Doubt started to creep in as she kept talking about how stifled she felt, how this wasn't how things should be between us. I didn't want to be the boyfriend who constantly questions his girlfriend. That's not who I was. Her words hung between us, making me question my own sanity for a moment. But something wouldn't let me drop it, no matter how defensive she got. Things only got worse after that night when Emily brushed me off. It wasn't immediate, but I started spotting more red flags, one after another, like little detonations going off in the background. She'd be on her phone constantly, more than usual, texting quickly with a secrecy that felt new to us. She'd turn the screen away whenever I walked by, or angle it just out of my line of sight. The first couple of times, I ignored it, not wanting to jump to conclusions. But then she started coming home later than before. Usually she's back by 6. It's a pattern I know like the back of my hand. But now she's rolling in at odd hours, sometimes as late as 9 or 10, with vague excuses about extra projects or last-minute meetings. I don't even know what to say anymore. When I ask, I try to keep my tone casual, hoping it doesn't sound like I'm accusing her of anything. And I'm not, at least not out loud. But still, each time she just brushes me off. "You're being paranoid," she'd say, with that dismissive wave of her hand. Or worse, "You need to stop suffocating me, Kevin. I need space." And Jesus, it's like a knife twisting in my chest every time she says it. The more I try to explain that I'm just concerned, that I've noticed things being off, the more she pulls away. I feel my heart breaking a little more each day, piece by piece, like it's eroding slowly. It's torture being caught in this limbo, feeling like everything's slipping out of my hands, but not knowing how to stop it. I love her. That's the worst part. I love her enough to believe her excuses some nights, telling myself that I'm just overthinking because she's right. I've always been cautious, careful. But then there's this gnawing thing in the pit of my stomach that won't leave. It's growing every day, clawing at me. I tried confiding in Mark the last time we talked on the phone. He didn't sugarcoat it. He's got one of those voices that cuts through your bullshit even when you don't want it to. "Trust your gut," he told me. "You've always been good at reading people, so stop doubting yourself." And I knew he meant well. Hell, maybe he's right. But I feel trapped. Trapped in this space between trusting her and trusting myself. What do I do if my gut is wrong? What do I even have if I can't rely on the person I've spent 3 years of my life with? It came to a head one night, though. Emily was out again. Another late work thing, according to her, and I snapped. I couldn't sit there anymore with these thoughts swirling in my head. It wasn't healthy. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I grabbed our shared laptop, her work laptop, technically, but she always leaves it out, and I just checked. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly. Maybe reassurance. Maybe proof that I was losing my mind. But instead, what I found, it knocked the air out of me. There were messages. Flirty, playful ones. And not with me. I scrolled through the text between her and Adam. Adam. The guy who was just dropping off files. The guy who understood her at work, apparently in ways I never did. I saw message after message. Little details about secret meetups, inside jokes, references to their little adventures while I was in Chicago. It hit me like a freight train. So all of this, all the weird energy, the secrecy, the space she suddenly needed, it wasn't paranoia on my part. It was her reality. And I was just the last one to find out. Every new message I read was like getting punched in the gut over and over again, this sick, spiraling feeling in my head. After everything fell apart with Emily, I didn't feel the explosion of anger I'd expected. There were no shouting matches, broken plates, or slammed doors, though God knows I'd imagined all of that. Instead, there was just this deep, hollow sort of sadness, like a balloon deflating slowly, releasing all those years of trust. I told her straight up, sitting there in that tense silence between us, I was done. I wasn't trying to salvage whatever fragile scraps of our relationship were hanging by a thread. Nor did I have the energy to pretend anymore. Emily barely looked at me when I spoke. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, her foot tapping restlessly against the edge of the couch. When I told her I deserved someone who wouldn't lie to me, wouldn't betray me, she hesitated, like she thought about saying something, anything, to keep me there. But it was too late for that. I'd made my decision, and for the first time in a long while I felt certain. When she did finally speak, it was soft, almost pleading. She said she didn't want to lose me, said she didn't mean for things to go this far. But every word out of her mouth felt like someone trying to patch a boat that was already sinking. My mind was set. I stood up, Looked around the apartment one last time, our apartment, filled with things we'd bought together over 3 years. It had gotten to the point where every corner of that place felt like a reminder of this life I'd been futilely clinging onto. Walking out hurt, but there was an odd relief in finally stepping away. Leaving that apartment behind, it was like a weight lifted, a freedom I hadn't realized I needed so bad. There was still pain, of course, the kind that sticks to your ribs for a while. But with each step, the knot in my chest loosened, and I started breathing easier, like the air out here was different, cleaner. Escaping Emily's orbit didn't come without its waves of doubt, but I kept going, refusing to turn back. I guess that's the thing, they say closure is hard to find, but for me, it was just leaving. Funny enough, a few weeks later I ran into Lily at a mutual friend's party. I hadn't seen her in years, but it was like the time hadn't really mattered. Her laugh was exactly the same, bright and open. We talked for hours, catching up on life like we'd never had a gap. There was something about Lily that was grounding. Maybe it was her kindness or the way she had this calm, steady energy that felt so different from everything I'd just been through. She wasn't flashy or putting on airs, just real, honest, and I found myself leaning into that more than I'd expected. Before I knew it, we were spending more time together, and it felt right. With Lily, things weren't complicated. There wasn't that constant push and pull I'd grown used to with Emily. Instead, there was laughter, casual conversations about the weirdest little things, and this effortless connection that kept building without either of us forcing it. I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. With Lily, I finally felt like I could just exist, no more wondering or worrying about signs I'd missed. It wasn't like I was actively tracking Emily's life after we broke up, but things have a way of filtering back through friends. Little snatches of her life would come up in conversation, stuff I didn't really ask for but couldn't avoid hearing about. At first it was small things. She was partying more, staying out later. That kind of thing didn't sound like her, not the Emily I knew, but then again, I hadn't really known her at the end, had I? Word floated through the grapevine that she started going out almost every night, hitting bars with Adam, or whoever was around. I remember thinking it sounded like the freedom she always craved, but apparently that sense of freedom burned fast. People told me she was getting sloppy, drinking way too much, and showing up hungover if at all at work. It only took a few months before she got let go. Marketing isn't really the kind of job where you can just coast, and from what I gathered, she stopped carrying her weight. She must figured she could get away with it for longer than she did. The news that she'd lost her job hit me in a strange way. I wasn't surprised, but I also never saw her as someone who'd fall apart so quickly. She'd always been driven in her career, and I thought maybe losing the job would be a wake-up call. It wasn't. What got worse was her declining circle of friends. One after another, people started distancing themselves. No one wants to keep picking someone up off the floor after a bender, no matter how fun they are at the start of the night. By then, she'd already started using other stuff to smooth out the edges. The drinking was just the beginning. The next time I heard about her, it was even worse. Someone mentioned Emily had moved in with an older guy, some creep who took advantage of the situation once she was desperate enough. The Emily I'd known wouldn't have gone that route, but this new version of her, I didn't recognize her anymore. She'd burned through the rest of her savings, and with no job and no real connection to any friends, she ended up stuck with this guy who gave her a roof and little else. Of course, from what I heard, everything came with a price. He was controlling, keeping her isolated, probably because he knew she had nowhere else to go. It's wild how fast things collapsed around her. Every now and then someone tells me she's still there, still circling the drain, caught in that guy's grip, far from the bright, vibrant woman she used to be. And yeah, there's no satisfaction in hearing any of that. I'm not happy about it. I feel a quiet relief, though, I guess. That storm watched from a distance. It makes me grateful for how things ended up for me. My life with Lily is nothing like it was. It feels peaceful. My career's going great, and with Lily it's just effortless. We moved at our own pace, and when I finally popped the question, I really knew it was right this time. No second guessing, no doubts tucked into the corners. Just certainty. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed the story, remember to like, subscribe, and comment on the video for more stories like this. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you have any similar stories to share, leave them in the comments and we'll make sure to bring them to life. Thanks for watching.